The message appeared on the screen at 9:47 in the morning. Pull request closed. Reason: substandard work. Deleted by T. Hargrove. 41 engineers were watching the shared repository feed at that moment. 41 people saw the notification. 22 of them had been in the video call 5 minutes earlier when Tyler Hargrove, senior tech lead at Vertex Systems, had opened the pull request submitted by the new contractor. The quiet one, who had joined the team 3 weeks ago, said very little in stand-ups, and whose name Tyler had not learned to pronounce correctly despite being corrected twice, and had shared his screen. And then, while everyone watched, Tyler had scrolled through the code for less than 90 seconds, said the words not even close to production standard, and hit close. He hadn't sent it back for revision. He hadn't left a single line comment. He had deleted a week of another human being's work in front of 41 witnesses, and then minimized the window and said, "Okay, who's next for stand-up?" Nobody said anything. Not one person on that call said stop. By 9:56, 9 minutes after Tyler Hargrove closed that window, Damon Reeves received a direct message from a number he did not recognize. The message said, "This is Paul Yanari. I'm the founder of Vertex. Are you available to talk right now?" That morning, Damon Reeves did not know that what Tyler Hargrove had deleted in front of 41 silent engineers was not just a pull request. It was the solution to a performance problem that had been costing Vertex Systems approximately $340. $1,000 a month in infrastructure overspend, a problem that Damon had identified in his 3rd day on the job and quietly fixed without telling anyone. The way a person fixes something when they are not sure if they are allowed to speak yet. Nobody in that meeting knew that. Tyler Hargrove certainly did not know that. He was about to find out. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight, and then let me tell you what a young man built in silence while the room looked away. Rewind 4 weeks. Damon Reeves was 26 years old, and he had been writing code since he was 11. Not casually, not as a hobby that became a career. He had been writing code the way some children read. Compulsively, hungrily, in every available hour, because it was the one place where the rules were absolute and fair and did not change depending on who was looking at you. A function either worked or it didn't. A loop either terminated or it didn't. The machine did not care what you looked like or where you had grown up or what your last name sounded like to someone who had already decided not to learn it correctly. That was the thing about code. It kept its word. Damon had grown up in Gary, Indiana, in a 3-bedroom house on Meridian Avenue that his grandmother owned outright, having paid off the mortgage in 2004 with the proceeds of 31 years as a postal carrier. Her name was Evelyn Reeves, and she had walked the same route for 3 decades with the kind of consistency that is its own form of genius. She had kept a dry erase board in the kitchen where she wrote one rule every Sunday morning. Not a Bible verse. A rule for living. Things like, finish what other people give up on. And the work speaks first. Let it. Damon had memorized those rules without meaning to. He taught himself Python at 11. From YouTube tutorials and a library book, with a cracked spine that someone had donated to the Gary Public Library. He built his first functional web scraper at 12. At 13, he found a memory leak in a piece of open-source scheduling software used by a nonprofit that managed food bank logistics in 3 counties wrote up the fix, submitted it to the project's maintainers, and received a one-line response. Good catch. Merged. 2 words. He had printed that email. It was still in a folder in his grandmother's house on Meridian Avenue. He attended Indiana University Northwest on a partial scholarship and a Pell Grant and a work-study position in the campus IT department, where he learned, among other things, that the distance between solving a problem and being credited for solving a problem was not always a straight line. He graduated in 3 years, not because he was rushing, because he had already learned everything the courses were teaching, and the extra year felt like paying rent on an apartment you had already moved out of. He spent 2 years as a junior developer at a logistics startup in Indianapolis. The work was fine. The environment was careful, in the way environments are careful when they are aware of something they do not address directly. He was good at his job, and he was told he was good at his job, and the raises came, and the title did not change, and the work assigned to him did not change, and the room where the architecture decisions happened remained a room he was not invited into. He did not make noise about this. He kept a folder on his personal laptop called Current, a running document of every significant technical contribution he had made, with timestamps and before and after metrics. He did not share this folder. He kept it the way his grandmother kept receipts, because a rec is a record, regardless of whether anyone is asking for it yet. In September, a recruiter reached out about a contract role at Vertex Systems. 6 months. Possibility of conversion to full-time. The role was back-end optimization, identifying and addressing performance bottlenecks in Vertex's core infrastructure, which was a cloud-based project management platform with about 340,000 business users. The comp was $145 an hour. The tech stack was familiar. Damon said yes. He did not mention on his resume or in his interview that he had already spent 3 evenings reading through Vertex's public-facing API documentation, their engineering blog posts going back 4 years, and 2 conference talks given by their chief architect. He never mentioned what he had already learned before walking in the door. The work spoke first. That was the rule. He had been seeded deep in Meridian Avenue soil, and that soil had its own understanding of patience. Tyler Hargrove had been the senior tech lead on Vertex's infrastructure team for 2 years. He had come from a well-regarded startup in Boston, carried good references, and had the particular confidence of someone who had been told he was the smartest person in several rooms and had taken that information seriously. He was not incompetent. That was the thing that made the dynamic harder to name. He was technically adequate, which in his mind had graduated into technically superior, which meant that people who challenged his assessments were not people who were right. They were people who were confused or ambitious in an irritating way, or simply not at his level. He had looked at Damon Reeves's first stand-up and made a determination. It had taken him about 4 minutes. The determination was not based on code he had seen. It was based on things that did not belong in a technical assessment. The way Damon sat, the way he said, "I noticed something I want to look into further," which Tyler interpreted as uncertainty rather than precision. The fact that Damon was a contractor, not staff. The fact that nobody had told Tyler this contractor was coming, and Tyler preferred to be told. He began reviewing Damon's work with the kind of attention a person pays to things they have already decided are wrong. The problem was that Damon's work was not wrong. In his first week, Damon had been assigned to review the caching layer on Vertex's most trafficked API endpoint, the one that handled project status queries for enterprise clients. The existing implementation was functional but inefficient. It was refetching data on every request for data that changed, on average, every 4 to 6 minutes, because the cache invalidation logic had been written in a hurry during a scaling emergency 2 years ago, and nobody had returned to it. Damon saw this on day 2, not from the assignment brief, from reading the code. He said nothing in stand-up. He spent his third evening writing a revised caching strategy. Not a suggestion, a working implementation, tested against a local mirror of the staging environment he had built on his own machine, because he did not yet have access to the actual staging environment. He ran it against 6 months of anonymized traffic data that had been included in the contractor onboarding documentation. The results were not marginal. The revised implementation reduced unnecessary refetch calls by 63% on that endpoint alone, which translated, based on the infrastructure cost data in the engineering blog post Vertex had published in February, to approximately $340, 00 a month in reduced compute costs. He put it in a pull request on a Friday afternoon. He did not announce it. He did not write a summary email. He wrote the PR description in clean technical language. Revised cache invalidation logic for status query endpoint. Reduces unnecessary refetch volume. Details in inline comments. He submitted it and went home for the weekend. On Monday morning, Tyler Hargrove saw the pull request in the queue. The stand-up call had 22 people on it. Video on for most of them. Tyler shared his screen. He pulled up the pull request. He began to scroll, the thing that would later be noted by 5 different engineers who were on that call. Noted in written statements to HR, noted in messages to each other, that's same afternoon, noted in the record that was quietly being assembled before anyone knew a record was being assembled, was that Tyler did not raid the inline comments. He scrolled at a pace that did not allow for reading. He was performing a review, not conducting one. He paused briefly at one section of the implementations, the part where Damon had introduced a lightweight event listener to trigger selective cache invalidation instead of the existing time-based flush, and said, "This is over-engineered. This is not how we do things here." The inline comment at that exact line explained precisely why the event listener approach was superior to time-based flushing for this specific data pattern. The comment included benchmarks. Tyler did not read it. He scrolled to the bottom. He said, "Not even close to production standard." He closed the pull request. He deleted it. He said, "Okay, who's next?" There was a silence on the call that lasted about 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time in a group video call. Several engineers looked at each other through their cameras. 2 of them looked down. One person unmuted. Her name was Priya Anand. She was a mid-level back-end engineer who had been at Vertex for 3 years, and who, in the 11 seconds between Tyler's dismissal and her decision to speak, made a calculation about what it would cost her and decided she did not care. Priya said, "Tyler, I'd like to look at that PR before we move on. Tyler said, I've reviewed it. It's not viable. Priya said, I've seen Damon's work. I'd like a second look. Tyler said, Priya, we don't have time to relitigate every review decision in stand-up. Who's next? Nobody spoke. Priya sent Damon a direct message 30 seconds later. She wrote, I'm sorry. That was wrong. I have the PR cached. Can we talk after this call? Damon typed back, I'm okay, but he had already opened the current folder on his personal laptop. He found the performance data he had generated during testing. He added a row at the top of the document with today's date and the words, PR closed without review. T. Hargrove. He saved the file. He closed his laptop halfway. He thought about his grandmother's dry erase board. Finish what other people give up on. He had not given up on anything. What Tyler Hargrove did not know was that the stand-up call had been recorded as all Vertex stand-ups were recorded on a platform called Loom, and those recordings were archived to a shared drive accessible to the founding team. He also did not know that Paul Yanari, the founder and CEO of Vertex Systems, had been watching that archived recording at 9:48 in the morning, 1 minute after the pull request was closed, because Paul made it a habit when he had 30 minutes free to watch random stand-up recordings from engineering teams he hadn't checked in with recently. He had started doing this after the company hit 300 employees because he had learned in those years of leading organizations that the most important information in a company was almost never in the report he was sent. It was in the rooms he happened to look into. Paul Yanari had watched Tyler share his screen. He had watched Tyler scroll without reading. He had watched Tyler say, not even close to production standard, about code that Paul, who had a computer science degree from Carnegie Mellon and had written infrastructure code professionally for 6 years before starting Vertex, could see at a glance was sophisticated, carefully commented, and precisely targeted. He had watched Tyler delete it. He had seen Priya try to intervene. He had seen the 4-second silence. He had picked up his phone and found the contractor roster and found the name Damon Reeves and sent the message at 9:56. 9 minutes. 9 minutes from deletion to the founder's direct message. Damon saw the message at 9:58. He read it 3 times. He typed back, yes, I'm available. Paul called immediately. He did not open with pleasantries, not because he was rude, but because he was the kind of person who considered pleasantries an insult when a direct question would serve better. He said, I watched the stand-up. I want to understand what you built. Damon said, do you want the technical explanation or the business case first? Paul said, business case. Damon walked him through the numbers, the refetch volume, the 63% reduction, the infrastructure cost calculation based on Vertex's published unit economics, the $340,000 a month. There was a silence on the line. Paul said, you did this in 3 weeks. Damon said, I had the draft implementation by day 3. I spent 2 weeks testing it against historical traffic patterns. I didn't have access to staging. Paul said, why didn't you have access to staging? Damon said, I was told the access request was processing. It had been processing for 3 weeks, and no one had followed up. This was also noted in the record. Paul said, walk me through the technical architecture. Damon walked him through it. The event listener approach, the selective invalidation logic, the fallback to time-based flushing in edge cases to prevent staleness. The benchmarks, the edge case testing, the 3 different failure scenarios he had written tests for. Paul did not say anything for 11 seconds. Then, he said, "I'd like to offer you a full-time position." He did not say senior engineer. He said principal engineer. He gave Damon a number. Damon was quiet for a moment. He said, "I need to ask you something first." Paul said, "Go ahead." Damon said, "What happens to the team environment?" Because what happened this morning was not about code. Paul said, "No, it wasn't." He said, "That's also something I need to address. And I'm going to—" Damon said, "Then, yes. I'll accept the offer." Paul said one more thing before he hung up. He said, "The name. I've been mispronouncing it. I want to get it right," Damon told him. Paul said it back. Correctly, on the first try. Damon sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he opened the current folder on his laptop and typed a single line at the bottom. He typed. The work spoke first. He saved the file. He closed it. He would not need it anymore. What happened inside Vertex Systems in the following 72 hours was a process that felt, to the people experiencing it, both inevitable and long overdue. Paul Yanari did not make announcements. He called meetings. He called a meeting with HR that lasted 90 minutes. He called a meeting with the engineering leadership team, all 6 senior tech leads, and the VP of engineering. That lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. He called Tyler Hargrove in for a one-on-one that lasted 45 minutes, and that Tyler emerged from looking the way people look when they have been shown, in careful and documented detail, the difference between what they believed they were doing and what they were actually doing. HR pulled the stand-up recordings, not just Mondays, 9 months of recordings. They found a pattern. The pattern was not dramatic. It was not slurs or overt confrontations. It was the kind of pattern that is designed to look like judgment while functioning as something else. Pull requests from 2 specific engineers, Damon and a staff engineer named Marcus Webb, who had been at Vertex for 18 months, had been rejected at a rate of 4 times higher than the team average. The rejections came with minimal documentation. Comments were sparse, dismissive, and non-specific. Both engineers had lower rates of involvement in architecture discussions, despite having seniority levels that should have included them. Both had submitted access requests for staging, for production read access, for architecture review sessions that had been delayed or quietly allowed to expire. Marcus Webb, when HR sat down with him, said, "I thought I just wasn't good enough. I almost quit 6 months ago." He had not quit. He had kept showing up the way people show up when they cannot afford to be right about what they suspect is happening, when the cost of naming it feels higher than the cost of absorbing it. He was 31 years old. He had been at Vertex for 18 months, and he had submitted 9 significant PRs in that time, 7 of which had been closed by Tyler Hargrove with minimal review. HR pulled those 7 PRs. They had 3 engineers outside the team do a blind technical review. The reviewers did not know whose code it was or the context. All 7 were rated as meeting or exceeding production standard. Marcus Webb sat in the HR office and looked at that assessment for a long time. He said, "I need a minute." They gave him as many minutes as he needed. Tyler Hargrove's employment with Vertex Systems ended on a Wednesday, 12 days after the stand-up recording. The termination was documented, and documented thoroughly, because Paul Yanari understood, as founders sometimes do after surviving enough crises, that the documentation was not just about this case. It was about who the company decided to be in writing, in record, in the thing that survived after the moment passed. The separation agreement included a standard non-disparagement clause. It did not include the severance package Tyler had expected. His attorneys, reviewing the documentation HR Saticharts had assembled, recommended he sign and move forward. The VP of Engineering, who had been Tyler's direct supervisor and who had received and co-signed 3 of the delayed access requests, was placed on a performance improvement plan with specific conduct benchmarks. She did not resign. She later described the process as dull, in her own words, the hardest 6 months of her professional life and the most important. Those are her words. I am reporting them without decoration, because she said them, and they are part of what happened. The changes at Vertex did not stop with personnel. Paul Yanari commissioned an outside audit of the company's technical review processes. The audit took 6 weeks and produced a 43-page report. The report was not shared publicly. Its implementation was. Vertex restructured its PR review process to require minimum documentation standards for closures. Any rejected PR required at least 3 specific line-reference technical objections. Closures with no documentation were flagged automatically for engineering leadership review. Access requests were assigned SLA timers. Unresolved requests escalated to the VP level after 5 business days. They created a rotational architecture review panel that changed quarterly, with slots explicitly open to any engineer at principal level or above, including contractors. Damon was on the first panel. They created the Webb Reeves Engineering Excellence Award, named for Marcus and Damon, given quarterly to the engineer, whose contribution most clearly demonstrated what the award guidelines described as doing the work before the recognition. The first recipient, 4 months after the award was created, was a junior engineer who had quietly found and patched a security vulnerability in Vertex's authentication flow during a weekend hackathon. She had been at the company for 5 months. She was 23 years old. She stood up to accept the award at the all-hands meeting and said, "I wasn't going to submit the patch. I didn't think anyone would take it seriously." Paul Yanari said, "Why not?" She said, "I don't know. I just didn't." He said, "That's what we're trying to fix." She nodded. The room was quiet in a different way than the stand-up call had been quiet. Quiet like something settling into place instead of something being suppressed. Marcus Webb, sitting 3 rows back, looked at the junior engineer and then looked at his own hands for a moment. 18 months of showing up when he had wanted to stop. 18 months of wondering if he was imagining the pattern. He was not imagining it. The record had said so. In the clearest possible language, he took a breath. He stayed. Damon Reeves, 4 months into his role as a principal engineer at Vertex Systems, flew back to Gary, Indiana on a Saturday in March. He drove to Meridian Avenue. He sat at his grandmother's kitchen table with a cup of coffee and told her the whole story. Not the version from the news article the Vertex PR team had quietly tried to suppress and then stopped trying to suppress. The real version, the Day 3 discovery. The 3 weeks of testing, the PR deletion, the 9 minutes, the phone call. Evelyn Reeves listened to the entire story without interrupting. When he finished, she stood up and walked to the dry erase board in the kitchen. She picked up the marker and she erased whatever was on it from last Sunday. She wrote in her careful, deliberate postal carrier hand, "True wealth is what you give back when nobody's watching." Damon looked at it. He said, "Grandma, where did you read that?" She said, "I didn't read it. I've been saying it my whole life." "Why? You heard it somewhere." He told her he had. He told her about the story from Dunmore, Ohio, about Marcus Aldridge and Caldwell Street, and the quiet man who built what no one could see until the moment came. Evelyn listened. She said, "Baby, that is a very old rule. It just keeps finding new people to prove it right." Damon looked at the board. He took a photograph of it on his phone. He did not post it anywhere. He kept it the way his grandmother kept receipts, because a record is a record regardless of whether anyone is asking for it yet. And someday, someone would ask. The part that stays with me is not the phone call from Paul Yanari. It is not the termination, or the audit, or the award named for 2 engineers who had been quietly absorbing what they were not supposed to name. The part that stays with me is Marcus Webb sitting in the HR office, looking at the blind technical review of the 7 pull requests Tyler Hargrove had closed without reading, all 7 rated as meeting or exceeding production standard. 18 months, 9 significant contributions, 7 closed without evidence. And Marcus saying, "I thought I just wasn't good enough." I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment, not as a judgment of Tyler Hargrove, though Tyler Hargrove deserves judgment, as a question about what we allow when we look away, when we are on the call and we watch the window get closed and we think, "Not my conflict, not my moment." When we see Priya unmute and say, "Tyler, I'd like a second look," and we feel for a moment relieved that someone else was willing to say the thing, and then we go back to being quiet. What would it have taken for one more person to unmute? One more, not the whole room. One person. I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Not with me, with yourself, right now, in the place where you work or study or make things. There is a version of this story. It may not be code. It may not be a pull request. But there is something, a contribution, a correction, a voice, that is being dismissed without being examined. And there is a silence around it that is made of individual people deciding, one at a time, that the cost of speaking is higher than the cost of staying quiet. What would you do? Not what should you do? Not what does the right answer require? What would you actually do? Leave that answer in one word in the comments tonight. One word. No explanation. The honest one. If this story is worth sharing, send it to someone who has been in that room. Someone who unmuted and was overruled, or who almost unmuted and didn't, or who is sitting in that call right now, watching the window get closed. Subscribe, because the next story is about a chef, a 62-year-old man who had worked the prep station at a restaurant for 11 years. While the head chef mocked his food in front of the staff every Sundays, who entered an anonymous competition that the head chef also entered, whose dish was rated by 3 independent judges against his boss's dish, without either name attached, and what number the judges gave him, and what happened when the envelope was opened in front of the dining room. True wealth is what you give back when nobody's watching. Damon Reeves had been watching for a long time. So had Markovitz Webb. So had Priya Anand, who unmuted into a silence and said what she said anyway. The work spoke first. The room eventually had to listen.